You know what a superhero is, right? You know what one looks like. Mask, cape, incredible superpower, really tight trousers. And let's be honest, all of us secretly wish sometimes we were a superhero. Who would you be? What would your superpower be? I would be Marshmallow Boy, who instantly, at the drop of a hat, could conjure up a fire and some marshmallows and some sticks. And we could just sit around and chat. And if you're a supervillain, grab a marshmallow and it won't be all that bad after all. In this section of our story, we've got some superheroes, the prophets. Because some people think that being a superhero is all about what you look like on the outside. If you've got the kit, then you've got enough to impress everybody, and everybody will think that you're amazing and great, and they'll bow down before your superpower. And that is the trap that the kings and the queens in this section of our big story fall into. They get obsessed with the outside, what they look like. They get obsessed with the gold and the riches and the personal wealth and fame and glory. They get obsessed with power and with winning wars and with making sure that the little people stay the little people and just worship the kings and the queens and say how great they are. But the prophets, well, they understand something that our mate King David said a long time ago. He said that God doesn't look at the outside but is impressed by the heart, by what's inside, which ironically always is visible to others. Even though your attitude and your character is internal, everybody can spot it, right? And the prophets in this section of our story are the ones that show heroic levels of honesty and integrity and of pursuit of justice and of kindness and of sometimes, well, just crazy superpowers that seem to come from nowhere. They sometimes do incredible things and they sometimes say captivating things. For instance, you might have heard of Elijah, who stands on top of a mountain one time. It's him against hundreds of prophets of Baal. They're kind of priests from another religion that has an idol at the front of their temple made out of stone and wood to worship. And they have this competition to see who can set fire to a sacrifice and barbecue a bull without using matches. And even though the prophets of Baal try their hardest, when Elijah kneels down and prays, somehow it's God that sets that sacrifice on fire. And everybody realizes that Elijah, and therefore Elijah's God, must be more powerful. He meets a woman and her son, and they're just about to, in the middle of a famine, they're just about to cook with their last drop of oil and their last cup of flour, their last loaf of bread, and they're going to eat it, and then all hope is gone, and they're going to die. And he sits down with them and he asks them if he can share the bread, and then somehow he prays over the flour and the oil, and the next day they've got enough flour and oil for another bread, and then the next day the same again. They have enough daily bread to keep going. Or there's the guy that came after Elijah, Elisha. Easy to get them confused. Elisha does incredible things, like he heals a man from leprosy. These prophets don't always get it right. For instance, there's one time when a guy called Jonah, well, he tries to do the exact opposite of what God asks him to do. God asks him to go to a whole city where people don't know him and aren't living life all that well, and just tell the people there that God loves them. He doesn't want to do that because he doesn't like the people. So he tries to run in the opposite direction. It's a crazy story. It's not until his head gets sunburnt whilst he sits under a weed and a passing fish has to rescue him from a storm and a shipwreck that Jonah realizes that he's got it wrong, and he does what God asks him to. And while there are sometimes that the prophets do incredible things, they often say captivating things. They're not afraid, remember, to challenge the authority and the power and the outward projection of glory that the kings and the queens now have. They continually say to the religious people, maybe that's us, hey, are you sure that God likes all these sacrifices? You just sacrificed 10,000 sheep. Did you know that God doesn't like that? God prefers kindness, God prefers goodness, God prefers generosity, God prefers love. Why don't you just do that and save yourselves a truckload of money on the sheep? Because it turns out God isn't impressed by those kind of sacrifices or by gold. Be kind. Sometimes they go directly to the kings and the queens and they call them out and they say to them, even though you think your kingdom is never going to end, even though you think you're the most powerful king on the history of the face of the planet, you're not. And the king of the kingdom which never ends is going to blow the final whistle on you and your kingdom soon. So, while they don't always get it right and they often look a little bit strange, these prophets know who God is and who they are. And that all comes from their understanding of the big story. They don't get caught up in the moment. They don't get caught up in just them and their little part. They understand that the wide story of God has always been, right from the very first page, to communicate love and lavish blessing for all people. They understand that the whole point of the great big story is to communicate that God isn't impressed by the things that might impress you and I. He's impressed by joyfulness, generosity, love, kindness, forgiveness, a kind of love which protects people and fights for them even though they might not look like us or speak our language or have the same views as us, a kind of love that's inclusive and welcomes everyone. Those are the things which impress God, it turns out. The prophets know this, and they keep calling people back to this kind of God and to a relationship with God which is personal, which is marked out by humility and kindness, and a relationship which is a daily conversation, like between friends, much more than doing whatever you want and then going and throwing a sacrifice at the situation and hoping that covers over the cracks. And that understanding of their identity, that understanding of the big story of God, well, that, for the prophets, is their secret source of power. That's their secret source of endurance and the ability to keep going. Maybe that identity is the secret source of power and endurance and grace for us too.